1 second. All right. Well, hello and welcome. Thanks everybody for putting up with a little bit of mix-ups here with some of our electronics getting all set, and we've had a couple folks that were supposed to join us and are stuck in the snow here. So thanks for your patience tonight. So my name is Tiffany Leiden, and I am a floodplain outreach coordinator with the Montana Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, otherwise known as DNRC. Oops, I gotta put this here. We've got several people here that have joined us and braved the weather tonight. Welcome to all of you here in person tonight. And then we actually have a number of folks here joining us on Zoom. So I'm gonna try to do double duty tonight and kind of speak to both groups here. I know some of you have gotten a chance to look at the draft maps that we have here at some of the stations we have set up around the room. We've got several folks from DNRC here, myself, maybe Brent, can you raise your hand in the back of the room? Got a couple staff people from DNRC and Shilea here over at the table. And then I guess we don't have either of our engineers that we that did some of the study work, but that's okay. There are definitely other people that have been involved in this study. This is a big study involving all of Jefferson County. So if there are questions that we can't answer for you tonight, let us know and we will find the right people to get those answers to you. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a few minutes and cover what these maps are, what they mean, give you a little bit of background about the project, and then really give you time to talk one-on-one about your particular property, because everybody's situation is a little bit unique and we want to give you time to look at the maps and have time to do that. For those who are joining us online, we will have some information about how to get your questions answered afterwards, and you're always welcome to contact us and we can go through that anytime with you later on. All right. So tonight we're talking about floodplain maps, and the purpose of floodplain mapping is to help identify those areas at risk of flooding ahead of time before we have big flood events, so that we can try to keep people out of harm's way and reduce flood damage to buildings. This is a collaborative effort. The state, Jefferson County, Whitehall, Boulder, and FEMA, we all work together to try to identify and reduce flood risks. Floodplain maps today are called flood insurance rate maps. They are official maps maintained by FEMA, and they get periodically updated when new information is available. A couple things to note. These maps are not going to, these maps are not just showing any old spring flood event. What gets put on these maps are those areas at risk of getting wet when we have what's called a 100-year flood event. Now, it's kind of a misnomer. I sort of wish the person who came up with that term never used it, because people think, oh, if we have a 100-year flood event, we're good. We're not going to have another one for another 100 years. That's not how it works. A better way to think about it is that it's the flood event that has a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. So that's why you've sometimes heard in other parts of the country, oh, they had back-to-back 100-year flood events, or we've never had a 100-year flood event yet. We will sometime, but we just haven't had one yet. It's that 1% chance flood event. The other thing to keep in mind is that in a 100-year or 1% flood event, there may be localized conditions in some spots, like a culvert that gets blocked, or maybe a tree goes down, that might cause the water to behave a little bit differently in spots. But by and large, if we're doing a good job with these maps, they really should represent those areas that have a high risk of getting flooded if we have a 100-year or 1% flood event on each of these rivers. These floodplain maps are actually used for a lot of different purposes. They're used by Jefferson County and the town of Whitehall. We do have, I forgot to mention, we have folks here from the county, County Commissioner Kirsch, and then Megan Bullock, who's you introduced herself in the beginning. She's the county sanitarian and the county floodplain administrator. And then we have Alyssa Christensen. I'm going to put you on the spot here. So she's from the town of Whitehall. She wears a lot of hats in Whitehall, and one of her hats that she also wears is the floodplain administrator. Be gentle on her because she's very new to that, but we are here to provide her lots of support. But those are the two floodplain administrators in this part of the county. We got you. That's okay. We'll help you through that. So these maps are actually used by Jefferson County and Whitehall for where their floodplain regulations apply. The county and town have floodplain regulations that apply on the areas shown on these maps. And in turn, federally backed flood insurance is available to property owners and residents throughout the county, regardless of where you live. These maps also get used for planning and subdivision purposes. Septic permitting use these maps. The maps also get used by mortgage lenders to determine if a building or house they're financing has a risk of being flooded. And they're used for emergency planning purposes. Are there roads that are going to be potentially overtopped in a flood event? Are there neighborhoods that are going to be blocked? So given that, we recognize that these maps really should accurately reflect what's at risk of flooding. So they may need to be periodically updated, which is why we're here tonight. Oh my goodness. Okay. All right. Most of Jefferson County has actually had floodplain maps since the late 1970s. They were produced by the Department of Housing and Urban Development here in Jefferson County and Whitehall and Boulder, actually, much like they were produced for counties and towns and cities across the nation. In 1986, those maps were reprinted by FEMA as flood insurance rate maps, but there were virtually no updates. They just copied over that information and changed the name on the map and put a new date on it. I will say when they produced these maps based in the 70s, the late 70s by Department of Housing and Urban Development, you know, they did the best that they could. They used the information they had at the time to represent what was at risk of flooding in a 100-year 1% flood event. But as you can see from these maps, there's not a lot of information here. It's just kind of a shaded area. It's pretty coarse. Those are the areas expected to get wet in a 100-year flood event based on the information they had at that time. But these are the maps that you still have in Jefferson County. They have not been updated since the late 70s. The one exception to that is in the town limits of Whitehall. You have a kind of slightly different story. Whitehall's maps kind of look a little newer. They're digital, so they have some aerial imagery underneath them. And there are two creeks in town where there are floodplains mapped. So Whitetail Creek and Big Pipestone Creek, kind of on the corners of town there. For Whitetail Creek, there was that initial late 70s map that was produced. But actually in the 2000s, in 2003, there was a very small flood study done on Whitetail Creek. And so they did some surveying work and some engineering work, and they replaced that old map with a more updated map in 2003. It did not extend past town limits at all. So it was a very short truncated study, and it didn't have really good detailed topography. So I will say it's definitely newer than that 1970s map, but it's not as accurate as it could be in terms of the risk of the areas that could be flooded from Whitetail Creek. And we can talk about that a little bit more. For Big Pipestone Creek, again, it's got that aerial imagery, but that floodplain mapping was just copied over from that late 1970s map. So that is just as old as the other maps. but those are your current maps. So a number of years ago, the Jefferson County requested updated, better information throughout Jefferson County. And we started working together to conduct some updated flood studies. These studies will eventually replace your current 1970s maps with new updated information. If you're interested in what goes into a flood study and how they're conducted, I won't go over that tonight, but we do have some handouts around the room that kind of talk about the data that gets used and some of the processes that get used. For folks that are joining online, you can also get that right off of that project website. I'll go over that in just a bit. But those are here, and if you are really interested in the engineering aspects of flood studies, Brent from the DNRC here in the back is probably your guy to talk to for some of the more technical stuff if you're interested. Okay. So the results of these updated flood studies are these draft floodplain maps that we're here talking about tonight. And we're at the stage now where the draft maps are ready for review. So that's why we're here tonight. Public review of these maps is a really important part of the mapping process. Jefferson County and the town wanted to get them in your hands early so you can take an early look at them in the process. They aren't going to be finalized for a while. We're a few years out from that happening, but we wanted you to take a look at them if there are things that that you notice or you don't look right. That's the kind of feedback we want to look at and see if there are any corrections that need to be made or some adjustments. All right. So I said I'd talk about that website. So a lot of the information that came from the studies, the draft maps, the reports, and all the details are on that website that was listed on the letter that you received in the mail. That website is also here at the top here. And on this website, you can see this kind of gray box in the middle, and Megan talked about it. We held two other meetings very similar to this for the northern and central parts of the county earlier this summer. So now we're doing the southern part of the county now. We also hosted a meeting way back in March of 2021, and I don't know if a few folks were here for that. We did that because we had some very early results on just the Jefferson River. And we're actually working on a project to update and get new maps in Madison County and parts of Gallatin County. So they're about a year ahead of you guys, or 2 years ahead of you in this process. So we had results on the Jefferson River since your county share that. So we hosted that meeting to kind of share the results of the Jefferson River. So the parts of the Jefferson River have not been updated since then, but parts of the Jefferson Slough, when we added the floodplains from Whitehall Creek and Big Pipestone Creek, as they all kind of converge there into Jefferson Slough, there were some updates made to that area. So if you were here back then and you have questions about that, let one of us know and we can talk through that. Okay, so on this website, you'll see this link to maybe I can use my, no, I can't use my mouse. A draft map viewer, this blue box here. If you click on that, it's going to show you the draft floodplains, and you can also see how they compare to your existing floodplains. So I'm going to walk through what that looks like if you're doing that today around the room afterwards, or if you're doing it at home tonight or sometime later. So you can we can kind of walk through that.
All right.
So when you first open the draft map viewer, you're going to see the draft floodplain designations. And there's a little magnifying glass up here, there in the upper left-hand corner of the map. And you can use that to type in your address into a search bar. A little search bar will come up there. You can type into your address, or you can just zoom in and find your property and pan around that way. When you're looking at the data, the blue areas on this map are those areas proposed as the draft 100-year or 1% floodplain based on our new study results. Those are the areas that have a high risk of flooding when we would have a 100-year or 1% flood event. So that's the area that will fall under the town or county's floodplain regulations. And it's also where a lender will require flood insurance if you have a building in that area, if you have a mortgage on that building. A couple of things just to note on here. On a portion of Whitetail Creek through town limits, and then on Big Pipestone Creek, you're going to see an additional zone inside that 100-year, that blue 100-year floodplain. It's marked in red there. That's the floodway portion of those floodplains. Those are where you're going to see the deeper and faster moving water in a flood event. So that has a little bit stricter standings, standards. No new buildings are allowed to be built in the floodway portion of those floodplains because that's a more dangerous area in a flood event. The other color you're going to see on here is a kind of a tan color, and those areas have what we're calling a more moderate risk of flooding. It can be real shallow flooding in a 100-year event, or areas that would take a larger event, a 500-year event, something that would happen less often for those areas to get wet. Those get put on the maps mostly for informational purposes. Your local county and town floodplain regulations don't apply in those moderate risk areas, and lenders don't usually require flood insurance in those areas. Anywhere outside of those areas are considered low flood risk areas. Low flood risk does not mean no flood risk. I think this has been a really interesting, important year for me and others to kind of remember that as we saw in the south central part of the state that got flooded this year, floods bigger than 100-year and 500-year events can and do occur. And they can cause a lot of damage to homes even outside of mapped floodplains. That's why federally backed flood insurance is available anywhere, regardless of what flood zone you live in. So if you zoom in a little bit farther, when you're on this first draft floodplain map, when you first open it up, you zoom in far enough, you'll start to see lines appear across the blue area. And they have numbers on them. Those are the flood elevations. How high the water is expected to get in feet, how high the water is expected to get in a 100-year flood event. So you'll see those numbers change as you go down or upstream. So that gives you a height of the water. Much more information than just that shaded area on your current maps. Okay, has anybody been using the map viewer and gotten this message either tonight or been at home? Okay, just Brent, you've gotten phone calls. Okay, I apologize. So it's been happening to me a lot this week and to others, and it may happen tonight here too. I'm not exactly sure why it's happening. It's happening kind of more in this southern part of the county. I think it's because there's a lot of data on this viewer. It also has all of the Madison County information and some of that Gallatin County information. And I think what happens is it just crashes from time to time. So you just have to kind of you hit that button, reload, and you just have to start over and type in your address or zoom in again. I just want to apologize ahead of time. Don't get yourself frustrated if that happens. Let us know, and what we can do is we can print out a map and mail it to you or email it to you later. But we definitely don't want you to get frustrated either tonight or in the future. We'll just try to work around that. I just want to say apologies in advance if you run into that. So anyhow, okay. So back to the map viewer. So when it first opens up, it shows the draft floodplain maps, the results of our new studies. If you want to see what your current floodplain maps are, what we did is we actually digitized those paper maps and put them onto this viewer so you can see a comparison. And the way to do that is over on the left side, you're going to see some numbers. So if you click on number 2, tab 2, it'll keep you on the same spot, but it'll show you what the current draft or the current floodplain maps are. So Again, for everywhere except for Whitetail Creek, it's based on that 1970s information. All right. So sometimes people want to say, well, I can go between tab 1 and tab 2 and see the draft compared to the current. But sometimes they want to kind of see it all together. So if you click on tab 3 right underneath that, that's what it's going to do. It's going to show you a comparison of those 2 layers. And so anywhere that you see blue is, we're proposing no change to the 100-year floodplain. Was mapped as 100-year floodplain on your current maps. Based on our new studies, still at high risk of getting flooded. We're proposing to keep that as 100-year floodplain. Anywhere you see green, our land areas we're proposing to remove from the 100-year floodplain because it's not as at high risk of getting flooded as we previously, as the previous maps showed. Red is the opposite of that. Those are areas that were not mapped on, are not mapped on your current floodplain map, but are proposed based on the new information that the new study showed. It actually is at risk of getting wet in a 100-year or 1% flood event. Okay. All right, so there's a couple spots in this part of the county where you're going to see some changes from the old maps, and I just want to kind of highlight those right now. One is in the southeastern, just kind of down the street from here, the southeastern part of town, where Whitetail Creek kind of is leaving town, and it has to go through 2 bridges, under Highway 2 and the railroad bridge there. And those bridges are offset a bit. And what do I mean by that? If you kind of zoom into this, or you guys probably are familiar with this being here. What's happening is Whitetail Creek is coming down. It has to go under Highway 2, and then it has to take a pretty severe right angle turn and then get through the other bridge opening, the other opening under the railroad before it can flow south and then eventually join into the Jefferson area. So what the modeling shows is in a big flood event where you're going to have a lot of volume of water, all that water can't get through those bridge openings very well. And so what's happening, or what the potential in a flood could, what could potentially happen in a flood event is that you're going to get some water, unfortunately, backing up into town there. And some of that water is going to kind of spread out to the east along the north side of Highway 2. So you're just getting water kind of moving in a couple different directions there because it can't get through those openings as well if you have a lot of water. A small event, not a big deal, but if you have a lot of water, you do have some areas that are have a potential to get flooded. So that's a change that you're going to see there. Oops. Another spot I want to point out is kind of just south of here on Big Pipestone Creek as it gets to Kuntz Road. The study results show that in a big flood event, floodwaters kind of have the potential to really spread out there. And some of it's going to go through the bridge, but some of it's going to go south, overtopping Kuntz Road, and some of it's actually going to flow south there along the road. So that's another change that you're going to see from the current maps. You know, they didn't have the technology to really understand and map kind of where water has a potential to go. But yep.
When were the surveys done?
The surveys were done. I have it right here. If you're asking about the bridge, it was they did it before the bridge, but then they added in the new data from the bridge.
And
so
the dam coming out, the check dam, it was an irrigation dam, got converted.
I think so. So I will double check. Yeah. When was that? Do you remember when that came out? Just going to look at the survey here. So most of the survey and kind of bridge, they looked at all that was in 2018 and early 2019. If there were things that happened after that, we tried to make sure we got that picked up and added in there.
Corey, when was the new bridge put in?
Seems like 19, somewhere in there.
Yeah, that I know they got the bridge
Dam came out shortly
after that. Okay.
And
So-
that was the defining grade structure. for the pipe
It was, okay, yeah. So the person that is stuck on, in the snow here on the way, that was the engineer that did this work. So Drew Vance, if he ends up getting here tonight, we'll ask him, but why don't you give me your name and we'll make sure to get back to you on that, but.
I guess the
and
real
let-
question is, can that be, if it wasn't considered, go back?
Absolutely. That's the point of this. Like, are there some things that somehow got missed? We want to know that and make sure that these are accurate and up to snuff. Good question. All right. Oh, the other thing I wanted to note, I'll leave it on here. These maps are just showing surface water flooding. They're not taking into consideration high groundwater or the impacts of groundwater sort of mixing with that. It's just surface water flooding from those rivers and creeks. Okay, so before you leave tonight, I want to make sure that you know where your property or your house is in relation to these draft flood zones that we've been talking about. Again, when you're looking at the map, that blue area is the area proposed as the draft 100-year or 1% floodplain area. So that's going to be the area falling under town and county regulations. If you're going to do new building in those areas, you have to get a floodplain permit through those entities to make sure that whatever you're doing is you're building it high enough and safe enough to be safe enough from a flood event, and you're not negatively impacting somebody else. Yeah.
Always not taking into consideration the water levels in Clark County, down the line reservoir, or Ruby Dam, or these canals that take water from the river.
Yeah, so so we also have been doing studies in Beaverhead County, Madison County. So I'll just repeat the question for folks online. He was asking if it takes into consideration some of the reservoirs upstream, the dams. Only the ones that were built with flood controls purposes. So Clark Canyon Dam, I think, is the only one there that was sort of. But I guess the real answer is we use the stream gauges to really look at how high the water is. So those are kind of not used. It's already. I'm not answering that very well, Brent. Could you answer that for me?
So the hydrology for these studies is based on stream gauging data. And I don't know actually in this instance how that was done. I'd be happy to get back to you. But oftentimes, like Tiffany said, if Clark Canyon has a dedicated pool that is for flood control storage, that will be included in the hydrology for a floodplain story. But if it but if you have a dam like Lima or all of our DNRC dams that just fills and spills every year, there's no dedicated flood storage component to that. And I certainly agree that it affects the hydrology downstream, but it is not operated for flood control. So it is often not included in that, except as it is already, it's captured in the stream gauging data. So we're using generally measured data from these streams. It's kind of a squishy answer for you.
So the stream gauging data on the Pipestone and Whitehall is pretty sketchy.
Right.
Yeah.
Driven by a lot of variables.
Is there stream gauging data on Pipestone, or did we use regression equations?
Yeah, we use the regression equations on those. So yes, you're right. So the only time we use stream gauges because it's the best data out there, that it's actual height of the water, how much water has been coming down historically. It really gives us great information about what these rivers have been doing, and sort of helps us to understand what they could do in the future. For areas where we don't have either don't have a stream gauge, or we don't have very many years of record of stream gauge data, what you can use is look at other similar watersheds in the area that do have stream gauges, and so they look at all of those to try to determine what would this basin, what does this basin have the potential to contribute for water. So there's other ways to do that. So that gets used. There's a little bit of information about it in that flood study handout there, but that's typically how these flood studies are done. Yeah. Okay. So,
have a-
so if you're in that blue area that we talked about, before you leave tonight, if you get a chance to look at one of the stations around the room, also pick up one of these sheets. So it's color coded. So if you're in that blue area, 100-year floodplain, make sure you pick up a blue sheet that says, what does it mean to own property in a 100-year floodplain? And I'll talk through this in just a second. If you're in the part of the 100-year floodplain that's proposed as floodway, again, it's just on that portions of Big Pipestone and Whitetail Creek. Make sure you pick up a sheet that talks about that floodway, again, kind of color coded as that red. And if you're in the that moderate risk area, again, on the maps for informational purposes, but good to know that it's not as a high risk area, it's a more moderate risk area. We do have some information sheets about that. Okay. And anywhere outside that, we don't have a sheet for that, but it's considered low risk, but not no risk. So just kind of to be aware of that. All right. So these are the sheets that I just talked about. We do have those for folks joining online. We do have those on the website, or if you've got neighbors that didn't come tonight and you want them to take a look at them, you can get these off that same website here. So let's just talk about what does it mean, particularly in the 100-year floodplain. What does it mean if you want to do new development on your property and you're either already in a 100-year floodplain or proposed to be newly mapped into a floodplain? What does it mean for you if you want to do new development on a property, or what does it might mean for you for flood insurance requirements? So I'm going to just walk through at a pretty high level kind of what that means. There's more information on these sheets, so make sure you take those home. So Jefferson County and Whitehall have floodplain regulations. They've had them for a long time that regulate new development in these 100-year floodplains. In 100-year floodplains, there's a risk of getting flooded there. So it's obviously better if you're going to be building, if you can build outside those risk areas and away from that flooding. But it doesn't mean that you can't build in a 100-year floodplain. If that's your only option, the regulations do allow you to build new floodplain or new buildings in a 100-year floodplain. You just have to build them according to the regulations. So high enough so that they'll be safe and won't affect others. Primarily, that means that that first floor of that building needs to be 2 feet above that flood elevation that I talked about on those maps. Gives you a little bit of kind of cushion from a flood event. The one exception to that is that no new buildings are allowed in that floodway portion of those floodplains. So that's that kind of deeper and faster moving water area. So what about flood insurance? If you own a building in that high risk flood area, that 100-year floodplain, and you have a mortgage, your lender will require you to purchase flood insurance once these new maps are finalized. If your building is in a lower risk area, your lender will probably not require flood insurance, but it's still recommended. And you can, and again, if you don't have a mortgage, that is up to you if you kind of how you want to assess your risk and kind of voluntarily make that choice. A couple key things: landowners and renters can buy flood insurance, and homeowners insurance does not cover flooding. So flood insurance is really an important way to protect your investment from a flood event. I do want to note, for areas that are newly mapped into a 100-year floodplain, there are some discounted flood insurance options. And the requirement right now is that as long as you get your policy within 1 year of the new maps going into effect. So just keep that in mind. We're a little ways out from that, but that is available. If you have specific questions about flood insurance, Shailia from our DNRC program, I think she'll be in the back here. She's got some additional information about flood insurance over at her table. Okay, here's where we're at in this process. This timeline is also on that project website. If you scroll all the way down, you'll see that. We're kind of about halfway through this project. We're at the stage where we've got this draft data available for review, but we're still a few years out from these draft maps replacing your current maps. The reason is they have to go through a pretty lengthy public review process. And that will actually include a formal comment and appeal period that FEMA holds. Probably, I'm guessing it'll probably be about a year from now when that happens. In the meantime, we really encourage you to look at the maps and study information. If you see errors or questions or things that don't look right, I know you guys had questioned about that. You can provide that to us or to Megan or to Alyssa, and we'll work together. We want to take a look at that and see, like, how was that done? Was there something that was overlooked here? Was it mapped accordingly? So you can provide that kind of feedback informally to us at this point, kind of in advance of that FEMA appeal period. Bottom line, your review of these maps is really important, and we encourage you to take a look at that. It's an important part of this process. The other thing I want to just point out is that sometimes the maps in every spot might not be able to show really fine details. I think I talked about that with you guys there. So like if sometimes someone's houses might be on a little piece of high ground, the maps may not pick up that level of fine detail. I just want you to know there is a process available anytime, even after the maps go into effect, to get a determination on a small piece of ground or an individual house or building. And everybody's situation is a little bit different. So if you think that you've got a situation like that, let us know. We can kind of talk you through that, what that looks like. I won't spend a lot of time on that right now. Go ahead.
What they call a letter of map.
It is. Yeah, so the question was, it is called a letter of map amendment, or LOMA. FEMA is really big on acronyms, so you can just remember that. But it's really to get a more detailed determination. Usually you need to get survey information if it's close to kind of show that difference. All right. So that is kind of all I have for tonight. I'll wrap it up right now for those that are been joining online. Nadine from here is going to try to be available to talk to you if you've got questions. And for the rest of you here, we recognize that every property is unique and everybody's situation is a little different, and we want to be able to kind of talk through that with you. We have a few less people than we were expecting tonight to kind of man the station, so bear with us, or if you want to go home and we can do this another day if you want to look at your specific stuff, but we'll be here as long as we need to try to talk through your individual property questions. Okay. Oh, hey, Doug.
Hi, Tim.
Hi, Doug. Yeah.
Apologize for being a little bit late tonight. I was dealing with Doug Dodge, Director of Emergency Management for Jefferson County. I did want to, this is more of Megan's wheelhouse, but I did want to, there's something I always like to bring up on these things, and that's with regard to the flood insurance as it plays into where you end up on these maps. A lot of people do feel a lot of relief if they don't end up in one of the blue areas. It's really important, though, to think long and hard, even if you're just right outside of them, or if you're falling into one of those 500-year areas, or even in an area that's not indicated, but you are concerned that it might impact you. Think long and hard about whether you would want to take advantage of the flood insurance that's available to all of us living in Jefferson County. And specifically, I say that because our neighbors to the south and east are going through this right now. FEMA will not make you whole after a flooding. That's not what it's designed to do. So a lot of people think, well, I'm not in the floodplain, so I don't need to worry about it. If the worst happens, somebody will come and save the day. Unfortunately, that does not happen. They will give a little bit of assistance for like rental help, things like that. But it's critical for all of us to take our own responsibility for our own property. And if we think we might be there, figure out a way to try to afford it. The benefit of course, not being in those blue zones is it's generally less expensive. I'm not an expert in flood insurance, but something to really, really think about. Even if you fall outside those zones, or if you know people who do, it can be a relief not to have that hook, but it's also super important to protect yourself, because when that bad day comes, and a lot of people are discovering this, they're left with a whole lot of nothing when the worst happens. So just something to think about, something I always like to bring up in meetings like this.
and if I can echo, he is spot on with what he's saying. And what we have seen, like my boss tonight, Tracy Sears, she's in Red Lodge with FEMA right now. That recovery is still going on from June. It will be going on for a couple more years. The flood that's happened in Roundup in 2011, they are now just doing a second round of funding and mitigation to try to still take care of that. And we're 11 years past that flood. So the one thing I do want to add that he said, and you know, I'm like anybody else, flood insurance is expensive and it's only going to cover up to 250,000 of the home. It doesn't matter the value of your home. $1 million home, you know, a $200,000 home, that's as far as it's going to go. But when FEMA comes in, and what unfortunately happened with a lot of the victims the South this summer, was they came in and they offered them some rental assistance or a little bit of assistance, which usually for individual assistance is about a maximum of $6,500. All right. They then said, if you accept this, it is mandatory for the life of your property that you have to carry flood insurance. And a lot of those folks, especially some of those in Bromberg, who really did not have the means to purchase flood insurance in the first place, they were, I mean, that was another slap to them, because then they can't accept this assistance that we're offering you because they can't keep the other end of the deal of keeping lifetime flood insurance. And so there's a lot of things that I know these maps are hard sometimes, and there was a lot of red on that one map, okay? And that's hard to take, but try to look at it as like, hey, we're trying to help you guys ahead of time, identify the risk and mitigate that. You know, there are measures that you guys can take to maybe help you. And then you can do what he said, maybe come along later and see if you can be taken out so that you don't need the flood insurance. Three Forks right now is a great example of that, and I just spent my morning in Three Forks. I mean, come on guys, they're right between two rivers, right? And these new maps were coming to them and they were being shown a lot of red, just like you guys. In fact, what was it, Tiffany? 968 houses were getting put in. But Three Forks is trying to be ahead of the game, and they worked with DNRC and they worked with Headwaters Economics and they worked with FEMA, and they have now got some programming that they are hopefully about to get funded for that's going to help protect those homes, and they may not be put in, but they have to do some really creative mitigation steps. And that's what people like Montana DES and FEMA and DNRC, you know, if it comes to that for Whitehall, possibly we can help you guys work on stuff.
Great. Thank you.
But
All right.
these men
Thanks. All right.
as a risk management.
Is that a quick one? I want to make sure people have time to get their questions answered, but one more quick, sure.
Flood insurance covers primary residence and or outbuildings or adjacent property here.
It's my understanding you want to work with your insurance agent, but typically it's the residents or anything you're taking a loan out on. So it's buildings. So I think you probably could get flood insurance on other buildings if you want to do that. So yeah, I would talk to an insurance agent. There's different policies. Some are the federally backed through the National Flood Insurance policies, but they're also insurance agents that write private policies too. So ask about both.
And
Yeah.
just keep in mind too, it's up to the bank. So just because you may not be in the map, but the bank knows there's a risk, they can still require it.
Just 1% discount applied to the properties not
No, that discount is just for newly mapped properties. But I will say the federal government has just kind of revamped how they do the National Flood Insurance policy or program. And it's kind of like car insurance now a little bit, where like they put in all these factors, you know, if you're getting car insurance, if you're 16 as opposed to 50, it's going to be different. If your house is, you know, older or, you know, built differently, as you know, there's all bunch of variables that go into it now to make it more kind of accurate for that risk. So, okay, well, I don't want to keep you too long. Thanks everybody for coming. Appreciate all the comments from folks, and we're here to try to look at your particular property and get some questions answered. Thanks so much for coming. Okay, I'm gonna move this over here. Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry if I didn't make that sure. We'll have some stations set up around. I'm just trying to get this one over here.